Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Mariam Saab. Coming up, a decades-long conflict between Turkey and Kurdish militants comes to a head. Turkey launches an air and ground campaign against Syrian Kurds in the country's northwestern region of Afrin. To the border between Lebanon and Syria, the Kar crossing is open again after 5 years of closure. But do Syrian refugees want to go home? Well, we take you inside the Lebanese city of Kar, home to some 30,000 refugees. And a symbol of Palestinian resistance in the digital age, at 16, Ahed Tamimi has sparked debate over the power of social media as a platform for political dissent. But first, codenamed Operation Olive Branch, Turkey launched an air and ground campaign into Syria's northwestern region of Afrin in recent days. The aim, to squeeze fighters affiliated with the People's Protection Units, a Syrian Kurdish force that has controlled territory in northern Syria after making gains against the Islamic State group. Well, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan now hopes to prevent the collective Kurdish forces from forming a united front along the Turkish border. This next report explains the different Kurdish armed groups and what they each stand for.
Contrary to what the name implies, Operation Olive Branch is not exactly peaceful. On January 20th, the Turkish army began bombing the Kurdish YPG militia's positions in Syria. The goal, to crush the YPG in and around Afrin. The attack was denounced as barbaric by Syria's Kurds.
This barbaric attack is a flagrant aggression against all components of Syria and is clear support to the Islamic State terrorist organization.
There are many Kurdish armed groups in and around Syria. One thing they all have in common is the fight against the Islamic State organization. But the 30 to 40 million strong population of Kurds in Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran are not necessarily allies. The Peshmerga are the military forces of the federal region of Iraqi Kurdistan, historically responsible for safety in the region. The president of the autonomous region, Masoud Barzani, is a longtime ally of Turkey, for commercial reasons primarily, but also out of fear that Turkey's Kurds could try to encroach on his people's territory. For this, he has always tolerated Turkish military operations in Iraqi Kurdistan. In Syria, the main Kurdish armed group is the YPG. Hierarchical and disciplined, the People's Protection Units function more like an army than a militia. They are indispensable in the fight against Islamists, especially as the largest part of the Syrian Democratic Forces, a multi-ethnic and religious coalition backed by the United States. The YPG is ideologically close to the PKK, the Kurdish guerrilla group in Turkey, considered a terror group by Ankara, Washington, and the European Union. Since the 1980s, the PKK, or Kurdistan Workers' Party, has been trying to fight their way to an independent state. Recently, they've rolled back their demands, calling instead for more autonomy. For Turkey's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the idea of an autonomous Kurdish state in Turkey is indefensible.
This is a national fight, and in this fight we have to crush all those that are against us. We will finish the PKK and its allies.
Despite their divisions, the different Kurdish factions have been vital to the fight against the Islamic State group. They've helped whittle away the group's territory in Syria, forming a Kurdish strip along Turkey's border. Cause for concern for Ankara's leadership.
Let's now take you to the Kar border crossing between Lebanon and Syria. It reopened in December after a closure of some 5 years. Now, since the war began in Syria, the number of refugees in Kar, the closest Lebanese town to the border, has climbed to some 30,000. Beyond Kar, that number swells to short of 1 million Syrian refugees in the country, according to the UN. Now, earlier this year, Lebanese President Michel Aoun asked the international community to help them return home safely. Julie Dungelhoeff with Emerald Maxwell have this report from Kar.
Welcome to Al-Assad, Syria. It's a message meant to be welcoming. Yet few travellers dare to cross the border again. We're in northern Lebanon, some 50 kilometres from Homs in Syria. The border crossing, which has been closed since 2011, reopened a month ago.
It's my first time crossing this border again. The road is very safe. It went smoothly. Everything went okay.
That day, we saw no one crossing in the other direction, into Syria. Just last summer, there were still jihadists hiding in the mountains. They were only knocked out in August, trapped between the Lebanese army on one side and Hezbollah and the Syrian army on the other. 30,000 Syrians fled to Al-Qar. They wait here in these tents. Most arrived in 2011, at the height of the crisis.
This is all we have. 2 foam mattresses. These are my children's clothes. And these are mine. We have nothing else. We left Syria empty-handed. We took nothing with us.
Suad fled with her husband and 2 children, the only members of her family that are still alive. The others were killed by jihadists. Despite living in a tent, she'd rather stay here, where she gets help from international organizations.
If it was safe, and if we still had our homes, we would want to go back. Why wouldn't we? We've been here 3 years and we're fed up. But we have nothing left in Syria. Our house was destroyed and half of our family killed. We can't go back.
In this small Christian town, the Syrians are unwelcome. The population has quadrupled to more than 40,000 people, but the infrastructure hasn't kept up. And the closure of the border for 6 years has taken its toll on the city's economy.
When the road was open, it was good. Everything was going well. But when the Syrians arrived, it went downhill. The economic situation here is catastrophic. I buy 10 bags of bread and I have to throw 4 of them away in the end. I also buy vegetables and throw a lot of them away. When the Syrians arrived in the region, they opened their own little shop.
Since the border reopened in mid-December, and with a majority of cities retaken from the Islamic State group, the villagers hope the Syrians will return home.
The Syrian regime's conditions for returning are complicated. People who have had no security problems can return. But if the Syrian authorities have the slightest doubt about a person or his family, if a person was injured, or if any of his family has been killed or wounded by the Islamic State group or Jabhat al-Nusra, or belongs to any opposition faction, they won't let them through. We would like them to go back to their country now, not later, because their presence here is a disaster both politically and demographically, and it jeopardizes us.
With the Syrians here, these Maronite Christians find themselves a minority in their own land. And the demons of the Lebanese civil war are resurging. The Red Cross says 80% of Syrian refugees in the region hope to return home.
Ahed Tamimi is a symbol of the power of Palestinian resistance in the digital age. At 11, she was caught on camera raising her bare fists at an Israeli soldier. Now at 16, footage of Ahed confronting armed forces in the occupied West Bank has gone viral, leading to her arrest. A prominent Israeli poet controversially compared the young activist to Holocaust victim Anne Frank, while others claim she's part of so-called Palestinian propaganda. Anka Ullah explains both sides of the debate.
By the end of November last year, more than 300 Palestinian minors were held in Israeli prisons. But none of them has incited an international reaction quite like 16-year-old Ahed Tamimi. Since being detained by Israeli police in December, she continues to draw crowds of journalists at each court appearance. Hundreds of thousands of people around the world have signed online petitions to demand her freedom, and protests have been held from the West Bank all the way to Paris, with a common cry, "Free Ahed."
Ahed Tamimi resisted by shoving these soldiers who permanently occupy her home and her village.
The image of Tamimi holding her fist up in the face of an Israeli soldier was first seen around the world in 2012, when she was just 11 years old. Since then, Tamimi's become a symbol of Palestinian resistance. But Israeli officials see her as a propaganda tool, used by her activist parents to star in carefully choreographed so-called Pallywood videos.
The Tamimi family, which may not be a real family, dresses up kids in American clothes, and pays them to provoke IDF troops on camera. This cynical and cruel use of children constitutes abuse. Human rights organizations must investigate.
Her father, a well-known activist in Nabi Saleh in the West Bank, admits that his daughter's image has sparked a movement. But he hails her as the new generation of resistance fighters in an ever-connected world.
It's help, and it's also knocked the door of the closed heart that they saw their racism through her face because they said their children.
For 5 years, he has filmed every move his daughter has made. Her actions have been praised by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But her latest video, shot by her mother last December, could land her in Israeli prison for up to 7 years. In it, she's seen hitting a soldier outside her home after her cousin was allegedly hit in the face by a rubber bullet during a protest. Tamimi's been indicted on 12 charges, including alleged assault. The video is being used as evidence against her. Her next hearing is set for January 31st, the day of her 17th birthday.
And finally, a small step from a big height for women's equality in Iran. 35-year-old parachuting enthusiast Bahareh Sassani has been skydiving for less than 2 years, but already has more than 220 jumps under her belt. She's a rare sort in her conservative homeland, just one of a handful of female skydivers. The daredevil pastime is still very much the domain of men in the country, made more complicated by the fact that there's no parachuting club, so she has to take her jumps with the army. We'll leave you with these inspiring images, and that's it for this edition of Middle East Matters. Don't forget you can get our latest news online. Thanks for watching. More news coming up here on France 24.
Inside the